My family hijacked my vacation plans for my golden sister and her kids, but this time I had my own secret escape plan. The clinking of my mother's silverware against her porcelain plate was the only sound in the room, a tiny, nervous rhythm against a backdrop of crushing silence. It was supposed to be a celebration. My celebration. 2 years. 2 years sober, and I had gifted myself the one thing I'd dreamed of through every white-knuckled night and every temptation-filled day. A month in a small, quiet town on the coast of Portugal. A place where the sun was warm, the sea was blue, and no one knew my name or the ghosts I was trying to outrun. My bags were practically packed. My ticket was a golden sliver of hope tucked into my wallet, and my family was here, at this meticulously set dinner table, to supposedly wish me well. My brother, Mark, sat opposite me, his gaze fixed on the floral centerpiece as if it held the secrets to the universe. Beside him, his wife, Beatrice, radiated a smug serenity that always set my teeth on edge. She was the architect of this silence. She had been picking at the loose threads of my composure all evening, with her little digs disguised as concern. "Are you sure you're ready for this, Chloe? All that unstructured time? Alone?" she'd murmured, her hand gently stroking Mark's arm. "It's just, we worry. We all worry so much." I had kept my smile plastered on, a brittle shield against her insidious poison. I knew what she was doing. For years, my addiction had been the defining feature of my existence within this family, and my recovery was an inconvenient rewrite of the script. It took away her role as the stable, superior caregiver, and my role as the tragic, dependent mess. She hated it. She needed me to be fragile, because my fragility made her feel strong. My mother finally set her fork down with a sigh. "Well, I think it's a wonderful idea. A fresh start." Her voice was thin, wavering under the weight of Beatrice's disapproval. She was a woman who had spent her life trying to keep a peace that never really existed. "Oh, we agree, Mom," Beatrice said, her voice suddenly bright and syrupy. She reached across the table and squeezed Mark's hand. He looked up, startled, like a puppet whose strings had just been tugged. "We think it's such a fantastic idea, in fact, that we've decided to make it a real family celebration." I felt a cold dread snake its way up my spine. I knew that tone. It was the tone she used right before she dropped a bomb, smiling all the while. "What are you talking about, Beatrice?" I asked, my voice flat. She beamed, a triumphant, predatory glint in her eyes. "Well, we couldn't let you celebrate such a monumental achievement all by yourself, so we're coming with you. All of us. The kids are so excited to see Portugal. We booked our tickets this morning. We even managed to get the suite right next to yours at that lovely little hotel. It's going to be a proper family holiday." The room tilted. The air rushed out of my lungs, replaced by a thick, suffocating disbelief. This wasn't a holiday. It was an invasion, an occupation. My sanctuary, the one place I was going to be truly free, had just been colonized. I looked at Mark, my brother, my childhood protector, and saw nothing but a hollowed-out man, a ventriloquist dummy for his wife's ambitions. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He just stared at his plate, a faint, ashamed flush creeping up his neck. "You can't be serious," I whispered. The words felt like sandpaper in my throat. "Of course we are," Beatrice chirped, her smile widening. "It's all settled. It's for the best, Chloe. This way, we can support you. Make sure you stay on track. A support system is so crucial, isn't it?" The last sentence was a direct quote from my therapist, a weaponized piece of my own recovery she was now using to bludgeon me. That's when the carefully constructed dam of my composure finally broke. Rage, hot and pure, surged through me. It wasn't the wild, destructive anger of my drinking days, but something cold and sharp and focused. For 2 years, I had swallowed her condescension, endured her passive-aggressive sabotage, and politely ignored her attempts to undermine my sobriety. I had done it to keep the peace, to prove I was the new, stable Chloe. But this was a declaration of war. What Beatrice didn't know, what none of them knew, was that this wasn't just any celebration dinner. I had arranged a surprise of my own. My laptop was sitting on the sideboard, angled towards the table. The screen was dark, but the webcam light was on. On the other end of a silent video call were 2 people. The first was Sarah, my sponsor, a woman with a spine of steel and a bullshit detector that was second to none. The second was my Uncle David, my late father's brother. He was a quiet, formidable man who had built a career as a forensic accountant, and later, a lawyer specializing in financial crimes. I had asked them to join to share in my good news, to show them my itinerary. I wanted them to see me happy and succeeding. Instead, they were getting a front row seat to the hostile takeover of my life. I took a slow, deep breath, the way Sarah had taught me. I let the anger settle, sharpening it into a fine point. I looked directly at Beatrice, and for the first time in years, I didn't try to hide the steel in my own spine. "No," I said. The word was quiet, but it landed in the center of the table with the force of a dropped stone. Beatrice's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "No? What do you mean? No. Chloe dear, the tickets are non-refundable. I mean, no. You are not coming," I said, my voice gaining strength. "This is my trip, mine. A trip to celebrate my sobriety, which you have done nothing but try to undermine since the day I came home from rehab. You are not welcome." A gasp came from my mother. Mark finally looked up, his expression a mixture of panic and fury. "Chloe, that's enough. She's just trying to help." "Help?" I laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Is that what you call it, Beatrice? Is that what you were doing when you accidentally served me a wine-based sauce 2 months ago? Or when you told Aunt Carol that I was white-knuckling it and probably wouldn't last the year? Was that helping?" Beatrice's face hardened, the mask of sweet concern melting away to reveal the cold, hard contempt beneath. "You are an addict, Chloe. That is a fact. You are unstable. You think 2 years of meetings and mantras suddenly erases a decade of of chaos? You need supervision. You need your family to make sure you don't throw it all away on some selfish, indulgent whim. It was then that she truly overplayed her hand. Her arrogance, her absolute certainty that she held all the power, made her reckless. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial, gloating whisper. Your father knew it. He knew you couldn't be trusted. That's why he put me in charge of things. He knew I would be the only one strong enough to manage you and your appetites. A chill went through me that had nothing to do with anger. In charge of what? What are you talking about? She smirked. The trust, of course. Your inheritance. He made me the co-trustee alongside Mark right before he died. He knew Mark was too soft on you. He knew you'd drink it all away if you had the chance. Every penny you've received for the last 5 years has come through me. I decide what you need, what you can handle, and I have decided that you cannot handle a month alone in Europe. I won't approve the funds. The confession hung in the air, thick and poisonous. She had said it. She had finally said the quiet part out loud. It wasn't just about control. It was about my father's legacy, my financial independence. She held the purse strings, and she believed that gave her ownership of my life. She sat back, her arms crossed, the picture of absolute victory. She thought she had me trapped. She thought she had won. But as I stared at her, my shock gave way to a slow, dawning clarity. I wasn't looking at her. I was looking past her, at the small, glowing green light on my laptop. Uncle David, the forensic accountant, the man who had managed my father's estate before his illness, had just heard the co-trustee of a multi-million-dollar trust confess to using her position to psychologically manipulate and control a beneficiary. He had just heard her admit to blocking access to funds based on personal whim rather than fiduciary duty. I let the silence stretch, watching the smug satisfaction on her face. I let her savor her perceived triumph. Then, I slowly picked up my wine glass filled with sparkling water and took a long, deliberate sip. I set it down gently. Beatrice, I said, my voice perfectly calm, I think you should turn around and say hello to my lawyer. The change in her expression was instantaneous and glorious. The smugness evaporated, replaced by a flash of confusion, then dawning horror as she followed my gaze to the laptop. I reached over, tapped the spacebar, and the screen came to life. There was Sarah, her face a mask of cold fury, and beside her, Uncle David. His expression was utterly devoid of emotion, which I knew from experience was far more terrifying than any rage. He was simply watching, listening, and calculating. Beatrice's face went white. Mark looked like he was going to be sick. My mother just stared, her hand over her mouth. The trap I had inadvertently set had been sprung, and Beatrice, in her boundless arrogance, had walked right into it and confessed everything. Uncle David's voice, low and measured, filled the room from the laptop speakers. It was not loud, but it cut through the tension like a surgeon's scalpel. Beatrice, Mark, I believe we have a great deal to discuss. Do not go anywhere. I am on my way. He didn't need to say another word. He simply ended the call, leaving his image frozen on the screen like a specter of judgment. The celebration was over. The war had just begun. The 20 minutes it took for Uncle David to drive to my mother's house were the longest of my life. Beatrice alternated between sputtering rage and panicked attempts at backpedaling. It was a misunderstanding. I was just explaining the structure of the trust. You're twisting my words, Chloe. You've always been a drama queen, she shrieked, her voice high and shrill. Mark just sat there, paralyzed, his face ashen. He kept opening and closing his mouth like a fish, but no sound came out. My mother was weeping quietly into a napkin. I said nothing. I just sat and watched the woman who had tormented me for years completely unravel. I felt a grim, cold satisfaction. The power dynamic in the room had shifted so violently it was almost palpable. She was no longer the puppet master. She was just a cornered animal, lashing out in fear. When the doorbell finally rang, the sound made all three of them jump. I was the one who got up to answer it. Uncle David stood on the porch, his trench coat still damp from the evening mist. He wasn't a large man, but he had a presence that filled the space around him. He gave me a long, searching look, and in his eyes, I saw not pity, but a quiet, fierce anger on my behalf. He squeezed my shoulder gently. Are you all right, Chloe? I am now, I said, and the truth of it resonated deep in my bones. He walked into the dining room, and the atmosphere immediately became glacial. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He simply pulled up a chair, placed his briefcase on the table, and looked at Beatrice and Mark. Let's start from the beginning, he said, his voice dangerously soft. Beatrice, you claim to be a co-trustee of your late brother-in-law's trust for his children. I was the executor of that will. I set up that trust, and I can tell you with absolute certainty that your name appears nowhere on any of the legal documents. The only trustees are Mark and a corporate entity at the bank. The silence that followed was absolute. Beatrice stared at him, her mouth agape. She had been lying. For years, she had built this entire edifice of control on a foundation of pure, unadulterated bullshit. Mark looked at his wife, a flicker of something confusion, betrayal in his eyes. B, what is he talking about? You told me Dad changed it. He was going to, she insisted, her voice cracking. We talked about it. He wanted me to. He knew you weren't strong enough. So you lied, David stated, not as a question, but as a fact. You lied to your husband, and you have been using that lie to manipulate and financially control his sister. You have, by your own admission just now, been unlawfully interfering with the distribution of trust assets. That is a very serious crime. This was the first step in a long, grueling journey. That night, Uncle David laid out the new reality. He would be taking over as my legal counsel. He advised me to pack a bag and come stay with him and my Aunt Margaret. He made it clear to Mark and Beatrice that they were to have no contact with me whatsoever. He would be petitioning the court first thing in the morning for a full and immediate audit of the trust, and for Mark's removal as trustee on the grounds of gross negligence and acting under duress from a third party. Leaving my mother's house that night felt like escaping a burning building. The air outside was cool and clean, and for the first time, it felt like I could actually breathe it. The fight wasn't over. It was just beginning. But the nature of the fight had changed. I was no longer a lone soldier fighting a guerrilla war of attrition against a gaslighting tyrant. I had an army now. I had my uncle, I had Sarah, and most importantly, I had the truth, recorded and witnessed. The days that followed were a blur of legal consultations and therapy sessions. My uncle's office became a sanctuary. It was a quiet, book-lined space that smelled of old paper and justice. He moved with a methodical, unhurried pace that I found deeply calming. He explained everything to me in clear, simple terms. We were not just defending against Beatrice, we were going on the offensive. The goal was twofold. First, to secure my financial independence by wresting control of the trust away from Mark and, by extension, Beatrice. Second, to build a case so strong that Beatrice would never be able to exert her toxic influence over me or my life again. The first task was a monumental one, compiling evidence. It meant dredging up years of painful memories. I spent hours upon hours scrolling through old emails, text messages, and social media posts. Every seemingly innocent message from Beatrice now looked sinister in this new light. Just a reminder, Chloe, your property tax bill is due. I'll go ahead and pay it from the account so you don't have to worry your pretty little head about it. Or, that car repair sounds awfully expensive. Are you sure they're not taking advantage of you? Let me handle the payment directly. Each message was a brick in the wall she had built around me, isolating me, making me feel incompetent and dependent. She had created a narrative that I was incapable of managing my own life, and she had sold that narrative not only to the family, but to me. Looking back at the sheer volume of her interference was nauseating. It was death by 1,000 paper cuts, a slow, methodical erosion of my self-worth. I would print out each email, my hands shaking with a mixture of rage and grief. Grief for the years I had lost, for the confidence she had stolen from me. My therapy sessions with Dr. Anya Sharma became my lifeline. I had been seeing her for my recovery, but now our focus shifted to the trauma of this betrayal. She groomed you, Chloe, Anya said during one session, her voice gentle but firm. She identified your vulnerability, your history with addiction, and she cultivated a codependent relationship under the guise of caring for you. It's a classic pattern of coercive control. Giving it a name was powerful. It wasn't just Beatrice being a difficult sister-in-law. It was a calculated, long-term campaign of psychological abuse. Anya helped me understand that my self-doubt, my anxiety, my constant feeling of walking on eggshells, these were not inherent flaws in my character. They were symptoms of the abuse. She gave me tools to cope with the emotional fallout. We worked on grounding techniques for when the panic set in, and affirmations to rebuild the self-esteem Beatrice had systematically dismantled. My support network, which had once felt so small, now became my fortress. Sarah, my sponsor, was a rock. She checked in with me every day. Remember your program, Chloe, she'd say. One day at a time. This is just another challenge. You are stronger than she is, because you are honest and she is not. Her unwavering faith in me was a balm to my raw nerves. I attended my meetings with a new sense of purpose. Sharing my story, my real story, without the filter of family shame, was liberating. I found a community of people who understood betrayal and the fight for self-reclamation. Uncle David, meanwhile, was meticulously building the legal case. He filed the petition with the probate court. The initial response from Beatrice and Mark was, predictably, a mix of denial and aggression. Through their newly hired, expensive-looking lawyer, they filed a response claiming I was mentally unstable, vindictive, and that this entire lawsuit was a product of my addled mind, seeking revenge for their well-intentioned but unwelcome vacation plans. Then came the first real blow of Beatrice's retaliation. It was a thick manila envelope delivered by a court courier. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a petition for an emergency conservatorship over me. Beatrice was arguing to the court that I was gravely disabled, a danger to myself and my finances, and that she, the woman who had been systematically robbing me of my agency, should be appointed as my legal conservator, giving her total control over every aspect of my life, from my medical decisions to my bank accounts. Reading the attached declarations felt like being kicked in the stomach. Beatrice had twisted every confidence I had ever shared with her. My struggles with depression in early sobriety were painted as evidence of chronic mental illness. My candid admissions in family therapy years ago were reframed as confessions of incompetence. She had even gotten my mother and a few other relatives to sign declarations in support of her petition, filled with cherry-picked anecdotes of my past mistakes, all presented as proof of my current instability. My own mother, coerced by Beatrice's narrative of my impending doom, had signed a document to have me legally stripped of my rights. That was my rock bottom. Not in a bar, not with a bottle, but in my uncle's quiet office, staring at a legal document that sought to erase me as a person. The despair was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. All the progress I had made, all the strength I had built, it all felt like a fragile sandcastle about to be washed away. The urge to obliterate the pain was overwhelming. For a fleeting, terrifying moment, I understood why people relapsed. The siren song of oblivion was deafening. I wanted out. I wanted it to stop. I gripped the arms of my chair, my knuckles white. I could feel the abyss opening up beneath me. I saw my uncle watching me, his face etched with concern. I closed my eyes and pictured Sarah's face. Breathe, Chloe. Just breathe. You have come too far to let her win. I took one ragged breath, then another. The moment passed. The urge receded, leaving behind a cold, hard resolve. She was not going to break me. me. I would not let the person who caused the wound be the one to sign my death certificate. David, I said, my voice hoarse but steady. What do we do? He gave me a small, grim smile. Now, we fight back. She has made a critical error. She has brought this into a courtroom where her lies will not survive the light of day. She has weaponized your past, so we will weaponize the truth. The conservatorship filing, intended to be a knockout punch, became Beatrice's undoing. It escalated the case from a simple trust dispute to a full-blown investigation into her conduct. It opened the door for my uncle to demand a comprehensive discovery process. We subpoenaed everything: Beatrice's personal bank records, her credit card statements, her phone records, and every last piece of communication related to the trust. Their lawyer fought us at every turn, filing motion after motion to quash the subpoenas, claiming they were an irrelevant and harassing invasion of privacy. But the judge, a no-nonsense woman named Judge Carmichael, saw through it. "Counselor," she said during one hearing, her voice dripping with impatience, "your client is petitioning to take control of every aspect of this woman's life, claiming she is financially irresponsible. Her own financial records are therefore directly relevant to her suitability as a potential conservator. Motion to quash is denied." The procedural steps were agonizingly slow. It was a war of paperwork, of deadlines and depositions. Weeks turned into months. Beatrice continued her campaign of coercion outside the courtroom. She would send my mother to plead with me. "Chloe, please, just drop this," my mother would say, her eyes red-rimmed from crying. "You're tearing the family apart." "Beatrice is sorry. She just loves you and worries." "She doesn't love me, Mom," I would have to say, my heart breaking for my mother's willful blindness. "She wants to control me. There's a difference." These conversations were exhausting, forcing me to set boundaries with my own mother, a painful but necessary act of self-preservation. Then, the first boxes of documents arrived from Beatrice's bank. It was an ocean of paper, thousands of pages of statements. My uncle hired a forensic accounting team, and we spent weeks poring over them, tracing every transaction. For a while, it seemed like a dead end. Beatrice was clever. Most of the spending was just lavish. Expensive clothes, five-star hotels, spa days. It was excessive, but not necessarily criminal. It looked like she was simply spending her husband's money, my brother's share of the trust distributions, like water. The breakthrough, when it came, was not a dramatic smoking gun, but a tiny, repetitive anomaly. A monthly payment, always for the same odd amount, $4,750 to a company I'd never heard of, Coastal Properties Management. It was listed under household expenses. "That's strange," my uncle murmured, tapping the line item on the statement. "It's too consistent for a typical household expense, and the name sounds like a rental agency." He did some digging. Coastal Properties Management was a boutique firm that managed high-end vacation rentals in Florida. He made a call. Posing as a potential client, he asked about their properties. Then he asked if a specific property, a beachfront condo in a luxury development, was available for the upcoming winter. The agent on the phone laughed. "Oh no, that one's on a long-term lease. It's been rented by the same family for the last 4 years." He asked for the name on the lease. The agent told him it was Beatrice's. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying speed. 4 years ago, Mark and Beatrice had told the family they'd had a terrible investment year and had to sell their beloved Florida vacation condo. They had elicited so much sympathy. My father, who was still alive then but in failing health, had felt terrible for them. It turned out they had never sold it. They had simply transferred the ownership to a shell LLC, then started leasing it back to themselves, paying the rent out of the trust account and classifying it as a household expense. They were using my inheritance, our shared family trust, to pay the mortgage on their own secret property. But it was worse than that. We pulled the trust's financial statements for the same period, and there, plain as day, were the distributions to Mark. They were significantly larger than mine. The trust documents stipulated that distributions were to be made equally to both beneficiaries. When I had questioned the discrepancy in the past, Beatrice had a ready answer. "Oh, that's just to cover the upkeep on the main family properties, Chloe. You don't have to worry about that. It's all taken care of." It was a lie. She and Mark were systematically taking more than their share, and had been for years. They had stolen hundreds of thousands of dollars. This was it. This was the evidentiary turning point. It was no longer my word against hers. It was not about my emotional state or my past. It was about cold, hard numbers on a bank statement. It was fraud. It was embezzlement. With this discovery, the entire landscape of the case shifted. My uncle's strategy became laser-focused. We would expose the financial crimes during the conservatorship hearing. The goal was no longer just to defeat the petition, but to utterly destroy Beatrice's credibility and expose her as a manipulative predator, unfit to manage her own affairs, let alone mine. We had to make a difficult strategic decision. We could have taken this evidence to the district attorney immediately, but my uncle advised against it. A criminal investigation would take years, he explained, and it would give her time to hide assets and craft a defense. We have her pinned down in a civil court, under oath. We use the conservatorship hearing, the stage she built for your destruction, as the platform for her own. He was right. It was a brutal strategy, but it was the only way to ensure a swift and decisive victory. My deposition was a grueling 8-hour ordeal. Beatrice's lawyer, a slick man with a cruel smile, tried to tear me apart. He brought up every mistake I had ever made. He read from my old journals, which Beatrice had apparently stolen from my childhood bedroom. He questioned my sobriety, my mental health, my relationships. He was trying to provoke me, to make me cry or scream or break down, to prove their case that I was emotionally volatile. I held on to the grounding techniques Anya had taught me. I focused on the feeling of my feet on the floor. I looked at my uncle, who sat beside me, calm and solid. said. I answered every question truthfully and calmly. When he asked if I had ever felt overwhelmed by my finances, I said yes, especially when I was being deliberately misled about them. When he asked if I resented Beatrice for her concern, I said, I don't resent concern. I resent being controlled and manipulated under the guise of concern. By the end of the day, he had landed no punches. I had not given him the emotional outburst he so desperately wanted. Then it was Beatrice's turn. Her deposition was a masterclass in narcissism. She portrayed herself as a long-suffering saint, a martyr who had sacrificed her own peace of mind to care for her troubled, ungrateful sister-in-law. She was poised, confident, and utterly believable if you didn't know the truth. My uncle let her talk. He let her build her own pedestal, lie after lie. He asked her simple, benign questions about the trust. And you managed the bill payments for the trust? He asked. Yes, she said, beaming. Mark is hopeless with details. I handled everything to make sure Chloe was always taken care of. And all these payments were for legitimate trust expenses? Absolutely. Every single penny. He didn't challenge her. He just nodded, making a note on his legal pad. He was letting her commit perjury. He was letting her build her own trap. The day of the conservatorship hearing arrived. The courtroom was small and stuffy. My mother was there, sitting behind Beatrice and Mark. She wouldn't look at me. It felt like a final, devastating betrayal. I sat at the plaintiff's table with my uncle, my heart hammering against my ribs. Sarah was in the back row, a quiet, reassuring presence. Beatrice was called to the stand first by her own lawyer. She gave a tearful, compelling performance, recounting a carefully curated history of my life that portrayed me as a helpless victim of my own addictions, someone who desperately needed her firm, loving guidance. Her lawyer ended by asking, "And you are doing all of this simply because you love Chloe and want to protect her?" "Yes," Beatrice whispered, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. "That's all I've ever wanted." Then it was my uncle's turn to cross-examine. He walked slowly toward the witness stand. He was no longer the gentle, concerned uncle. He was a predator who had scented blood. "Mistress," he began, his voice soft, "you testified that you managed the trust's expenses. Is that correct?" "Yes," she said, her confidence unwavering. "And that all payments are legitimate?" "Yes." He placed a single bank statement on the ledge in front of her. "I draw your attention to a recurring monthly payment to a company called Coastal Properties Management. Can you tell the court what that expense was for?" A flicker of panic in her eyes. Just a flicker. It's for household management, maintenance on the family properties." "Which family properties?" David pressed. "All of them. The main house, the cabin upstate." "I see," my uncle said. He walked back to the table and picked up a thick binder. "It's interesting you should say that, because Coastal Properties Management has no maintenance contracts on any of those properties. In fact, they are a vacation rental firm located in Florida." He opened the binder. "This is a copy of a long-term lease agreement between Coastal Properties Management and a shell corporation, BM Holdings LLC. And this," he said, placing another document on top of it, "is the incorporation paper for BM Holdings. The sole owners are listed as Beatrice and Mark. And this," his voice rising now, filling the courtroom, "is the deed to the Florida condo you told this family you had sold 4 years ago, now owned by that same LLC. Can you please explain to this court why the family trust, of which Chloe is a 50% beneficiary, has been paying the rent on your private vacation home for the last 48 months? The color drained from Beatrice's face. She stared at the documents as if they were venomous snakes. She stammered, she floundered. It's a mistake, a bookkeeping error. It's complicated." "Oh, I'm sure it is," my uncle said, his voice dripping with ice. "Perhaps you can also explain these complicated bookkeeping errors," he proceeded, document by document, to dismantle her. He presented the statements showing the unequal distributions. He presented emails from her to the trust's financial advisor instructing him to code certain personal expenses as trust liabilities. He showed credit card bills filled with thousands of dollars in designer clothes, jewelry, and spa treatments, all paid from an account funded directly by the trust, far exceeding Mark's legitimate share. With each new piece of evidence, Beatrice shrank. Her composure crumbled, her lies exposed under the harsh fluorescent lights of the courtroom. The saintly martyr was revealed for what she was, a common thief. Her lawyer was frantically objecting, but the judge overruled him every time. Judge Carmichael was leaning forward now, her expression a mask of cold fury. She was staring at Beatrice with undisguised contempt. By the time my uncle was finished, Beatrice was openly weeping, but these were not the crocodile tears of her earlier performance. They were the desperate, ugly sobs of a fraud who had been caught. I was called to the stand next. Facing Beatrice's lawyer for cross-examination was terrifying, but this time, it was different. The power in the room had shifted. His questions seemed pathetic now, his attempts to paint me as unstable, utterly absurd in the face of the mountain of financial evidence we had just presented. I spoke my truth. I recounted the years of manipulation, the constant gaslighting, the hijacking of my vacation that had been the final straw. I told the court about the night of the dinner, about her confession. I did not cry. I did not raise my voice. I simply stated the facts. The judge did not take long to make her decision. She didn't even retire to her chambers. She looked down from the bench, her gaze sweeping over Beatrice and Mark. "The petition for conservatorship is denied with prejudice, meaning it can never be filed again. I find the petitioner, Beatrice, has acted in bad faith, has committed perjury on the stand, and has brought this action for the sole purpose of harassing the respondent and furthering a campaign of financial and emotional emotional abuse. She wasn't finished. Furthermore, the evidence of financial malfeasance presented here is overwhelming. I am ordering the immediate removal of Mark as trustee. I am appointing a neutral third-party professional fiduciary to take control of the trust's assets, pending a full court-supervised audit, and I am referring this entire matter, including the transcripts of this hearing, to the District Attorney's Office for criminal investigation into charges of embezzlement, wire fraud, and perjury. A collective gasp went through the courtroom. Beatrice let out a small, strangled cry. Mark looked like he had been turned to stone. My mother was sobbing into her hands. I just sat there, numb. We had won. It was a total, complete victory. Justice, it turned out, was not blind. The aftermath was a strange, hollow landscape. The legal victory was absolute, but the personal cost was immense. The family was shattered beyond repair. The district attorney did in fact press charges. Faced with the mountain of evidence, Beatrice and Mark took a plea deal. Beatrice was convicted of felony grand larceny. She was sentenced to 5 years of probation, 1,000 hours of community service, and was ordered to pay full restitution to the trust, a sum determined by the audit to be just over $700,000. She avoided jail time, a fact that initially filled me with a bitter, impotent rage. It felt like incomplete justice, a slap on the wrist for years of calculated cruelty and theft. I talked it through with Anya. The legal system is designed to punish actions, Chloe, not intentions, she told me. It can't heal the emotional wounds. The verdict gives you restitution, but you have to give yourself restoration. She was right. True justice wasn't going to come from a judge's sentence. It had to come from me. It had to be built in the new life I was creating for myself, free from their influence. Rebuilding was a slow, deliberate process. The court-appointed fiduciary was a godsend, a crisp, efficient woman who managed the trust with transparent professionalism. For the first time in my adult life, I had a clear picture of my financial health. I had control. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. I started working with a financial planner, learning to budget, to invest, to stand on my own 2 feet. The hardest part was establishing the boundaries. I had to formally sever ties. I wrote my mother a long letter, explaining that while I loved her, I could not have a relationship with her as long as she remained unable to see the truth of what Beatrice and Mark had done. I told her I needed her to choose, and her silence was a choice. It was the most painful letter I have ever had to write. I changed my phone number. I blocked them all on social media. I instructed the new trustee that my address and contact information were to be kept strictly confidential. It felt like performing surgery on myself without anesthesia, cutting away parts of my life that were diseased, even though they were connected to me. My relationship with Uncle David and Aunt Margaret deepened into something incredibly precious. They became the family I chose, the safe harbor I had always needed. My sobriety grew stronger, rooted now not in fear of falling, but in the joy of standing tall. About a year after the verdict, I finally took my trip, not to Portugal. That place felt tainted now, a symbol of a battle I had won, but that still carried the ghosts of the fight. Instead, I booked a ticket to a small island in Greece, a place I had picked at random from a travel magazine. I didn't tell anyone my exact destination. I just went. And so, the story ends where it was always supposed to begin. I am sitting on a small, sun-drenched balcony overlooking the Aegean Sea. The water is a shade of blue, so intense it almost hurts to look at. A glass of iced tea sweats onto the small table beside me. My phone has been turned off for 3 days. There are no emails to check, no texts to answer. There is only the sound of the waves, the distant chatter of a language I don't understand, and the warmth of the sun on my skin. The scars are still there. I know they always will be. They are a part of my story, a map of where I have been, but they no longer define my destination. The verdict in that courtroom was not the end. This quiet moment, this peace. This is the victory, and it is entirely, completely, and irrevocably mine.